Hi, everyone, and welcome to this talk on women's health in India, the prevalence, gaps, and a real world use case. Just a little introduction about myself. I'm Aditi Dimri. I'm an economist by training. I did my PhD in economics and I researched on gender inequality using usually DSH and national level data. And then over time, I was like, I need to make faster change. So now I have my own startup with Saraswati and it's called Cranberry. So Saraswati she's an engineer herself from IIT, and then she's been in startups since 15 years. So yeah, so she's more like a tech and product person, and I'm more like a data and research person. So yeah, so today's talk will basically is in two parts. The first is I'll talk more about the gender health gap, and then Saraswati will present our LLM use case on closing this gap. Uh, so when you think of women's health, what do you guys usually think, right? For us, when we've spoken to people, it's often either maternal conditions. So, of course, maternal deaths has been a huge point of discussion, especially in India as a indicator. Also, pregnancy. Otherwise, you think of gynecological conditions, right? So, women-specific cancers, and now there's a lot of talk about infertility overall. So, this is what we always think when we think of women's health. Uh, but what women's health actually is a lot more things. So I think for all the women, this is like quite relatable, but the tip of the iceberg is like things like periods we always hear about. But then there is so much more things like urinary incontinence, which is basically that you don't have control over how you pee, or bone health, pelvic health, depression, and going into things like vaginismus, which leads to pain during sex. So women's health is a lot more than just what comes obviously to the mind. And overall, there recently has been a report by the World Economic Forum on the gender health gap. So this gender health gap is that basically, even though we know that on average women live longer than men, so on average globally 5 years more than men, women spend 25% more time in poor health. So now this poor health is defined by something called disability adjusted life years. So this is one, it is how many years you lose if you pass away, but it's also when you're living and you have a severe symptom, how disrupted your life is, right?
So this was the number that the report came up with that women spend.
Yeah, yeah. So this is what they back calculated.
I would have thought it's much higher.
But so on average, this is like 9 years in poor health. So if you think like if someone even lives, I mean, till 90, that's like 10% of your life, which is a lot. So yeah, it's amazing you thought it was even more than this because I think I am like 10% of life in poor health.
No, because if you consider pregnancy, PMS, period, the vaginal problems, all of that together, it's way more than 9 years.
But in this calculation is basically, it's not just the existence of it, but it's actually your life is disrupted. You are not able to be productive at home or workforce. So so this is really a measure of that you're not able to do your work, or if you're a female athlete, you're not able to train, your game is affected, right? So I mean, most women bleed, and that's just not even counted in this, right? So yeah, so this is the gender health gap, and in the last like now decade, 5 years especially, it's been one of the global health topics has been really spoken about, right? So as I said, we obviously think of like pregnancy and things as women health, but another very important component of women's health is conditions that affect women disproportionately. So here, for example, autoimmune diseases, 80% of the people having it are women, right? So I mean, and then even things like mental health things like depression and Alzheimer's disease, women are twice as likely as men to have that. And a lot of us know women who have a knee surgery, and it's much more prevalent than men, we think. And that's really because of osteoporosis, arthritis. And so these are really conditions which disproportionately affect women, sorry. And then the third type of thing, which is women's health, is conditions which affect women differently. So basically, here's an example of atrial fibrillation. So this is something that can lead to strokes. And now if a man and a woman have exactly the same condition also, it is more likely to lead to strokes in women. And I don't know how many of you have read the book Invisible Women, which basically brings out a lot of data on how the current world is designed for men. So one of the famous examples is heart attack manifestation. The symptoms are totally different in women than in men. And because of that, often when they go to emergency, it is not detected. So this is the third type of conditions where the manifestation is different in women than men. And all of this comes under women's health, right? So if we look at the breakdown of the conditions in women, the 100% of it, more than 50% are of these types, which are happening disproportionately to women or affecting women differently than men, right? And only 43% are same between men and women. So this really makes the whole case for that women health is something that needs to be studied on its own as well. Yeah, so this is what I mean, because often the question is, what is even women's health? So I think this is just setting the ground on what is women health. Okay, so then the point is, but why is this? Like, why is women's health turning out to be so different than everyone else's health, including men's health? Multiple reasons for it, but one of the big ones is our hormones and the famous ovaries. So interestingly, ovaries are an organ which compared to rest of our organs age way faster. So human females and males are the only one who have menopause, that you actually stop menstruating at some point of time. And it is in science considered highly unusual. Why is that happening to ovaries, right? And basically it has a lot of effects because of that. So the two main female hormones are estrogen and progesterone, which are basically responsible for a lot of our brain health, muscle health, heart health. And what happens in menopause is not just that your periods stop, but your hormones are over age sharply declining, right? So basically after 35 is any time where your perimenopause phase of life can start, which for women can last anywhere from 15 years to 2 years, where your hormones are drastically going down. And basically this has effects all over on all your health systems. And around in India, the average age of menopause is 48, 47, which is way lower than global averages. And then your hormones almost go to a zero, right? So this is like a huge difference which happen in human females especially. So scientists are really working on what if we can have periods forever. No, because periods give us like some amount of pain. I know no one, but there are so many other benefits of the hormones that it is maybe a trade-off that this leads to better brain health, bone health, muscle health, and everything. So this is the time dimension over age, how it's changing. But interestingly, even the periods, the usual mental model is what we think of is, oh, you bleed, you have cramps 1 day, 2 day, fine, you take off. But it's not just that. Periods are much more than just bleeding. So again, the estrogen and progesterone level. So these are the different phases of a menstrual cycle. So you have the period, of course, famously, but then there are all the other phases as well, and where the hormones are going up and down. And what that means is, for example, around ovulation, women often feel like really energetic because the estrogen has a lot of positive effects. But in the luteal phase, especially at the end, when both the hormones are crashing, is when PMS happens. Um, yeah, so again, this is like on average, if a woman is having a 30-day cycle, like a lot of times, half of it is severely affected by symptoms. Yeah, I can see women nodded. Yeah. But all of this, I don't know, Susan can maybe add more, but even for us, it's been such new information in the last few years. And we are like, how did we not know this? And now there are studies being done on how this is affecting women's productivity at work. We are working with female athletes at how it's affecting their performance. So yeah, there are a lot of impacts of it overall. Yeah, so just a bit more on like making this more data oriented now. So if we just even look at menstrual symptoms or PMS symptoms, documented are more than 150 symptoms. So just like cramps and mood swings are just couple of them. And so we have a chatbot, we're a startup, a tech startup. We have a chatbot called Berry, and we have over 1,000 users on it. And 242 have tracked the 14 most common symptoms on the chatbot. And how we hope to start having better measurement of symptom severity, but this is anyway standard for a lot of mental health things too, that you have just a scale of 0 to 10, where at the most severe end at 10, you basically cannot do anything else, right? Yeah, this is all self. So yeah, how we use it overall in our product and analysis is of course the time series analysis, with the assumption that a person's scale does not change over time. First time reporting is of course subjective. But yeah, we really try to make it clear that severe is that you need to take a painkiller, or or you have to take rest. And yeah, so basically, uh, what we one of the interesting thing we see in our data is that, for example, in our data they track all these symptoms. Is that basically it's not just cramps, and mental health symptoms are also rarely severe. So here you can see that mental health is again not just mood swings. There's so many different manifestations. We have had like members who say that, I feel like so angry, like actually a badminton or no frisbee player said that she actually wants to shout at her teammates, but she knows she doesn't can't do that. And it's not, she's not in a bad mood. It's basically because of her hormones. Then of course you can have social withdrawal, lack of interest, focus is disturbed. So, and in our data, we see that on average, actually, these mental symptoms are as severe, if not more, than just the physical as well. And this is a good time to talk also about PMDD, which is a very severe form of PMS, which every month women can almost feel suicidal. So basically, there have also been very new research looking at brain scans of women, where they see that the brain structure changes as much as it does during depression. And shockingly, the prevalence of this is also 8 to 10%. So one in every 10 women like goes through this every month. So always the scale of everything in percentages is a lot. And even the severity is often like really, really deep as well. So, I mean, then in some ways you're right to say that only losing 9 years of your life to this doesn't sound like a lot. But, uh, but I think for the women who are at the most extreme, it is much more, of course. Um, yeah, so and I think another point we wanted to make from our data is that this is often what is told to women, that it is bad lifestyle. Yes, I think that's relatable for women. But because we work with these athletes, we work with the Padukone Academy, Tata Sports Academy, Army Institute. So these are international level players, and 58% of athletes actually report these symptoms to skipping their training. And basically, till now, they've not really had waste solutions to manage it. And the whole ecosystem is basically not designed for that. So I think in the data, it's pretty easy. Each time we do anything, it really comes out that it is really severe. So yeah, overall, that's, I think the point here we wanted to make was that this gap is real. You see it at international data, national level data, and even in our own Cranberry data, basically. Yeah, so then we come to like, why does this gender health gap exist actually? Multiple reasons. So we'll highlight the three most important reasons which are cited. So the first one is that overall women's health is really, really under researched. So for example, I just go to the second point already, that in 2015, 5 times more studies were done on erectile dysfunction than PMS, right? So, I mean, and we are very passionate about PMS. So, of course, that for us is like a very shocking thing. Yeah. So, this stats like this for each of the conditions you see are very common. And a lot of the reasons for this is that in the US till 1993, actually, it was not compulsory to include women in clinical trials and RCTs on health. And this was really coming a lot because of the hormonal cycle we saw, that scientists felt that they could really not establish a baseline and a good control for women's bodies. So it was messing up their experiments. So they thought it's easier to exclude them. And since 1993 is actually made compulsory, so more drugs and vaccines are now getting tested on women. But as you can see, the gap also still remains. So yeah, under research for sure. This is a really detailed graph. Like here, if we focus on the purple and red, conditions. So the red ones are, as we had discussed, the disproportionate ones. So for example, depression or arthritis, and the purple are totally women ones. So on the x-axis, you see at the far right, that's like the percentage suffering by disability. So here you have things which are causing you 100% suffering, but the funding to them, which is on the y-axis. So funding, it's in terms of in the clinical registrations, how many are there in the pipeline, the studies, it's really low. So overall, that's the distribution of the red and the purple ones are often very much on the low side, except for female cancers. They are more research. Um, yeah, so over the last 5 years, all this data has really been brought out a lot by the NIH in the US, and there's been a lot of discussion on how can we change this. Um, so apart from under research, and one of the reasons why it is so under research is because it is underfunded. Uh, so here we have a beautiful looking graph, not made by us, by someone else, where in orange we have conditions where they are more a female dominated prevalence, and in blue the male dominated ones. And here again, as we can see that here we have mental health, anxiety disorders, headaches and migraines are also really very prevalent conditions and symptoms which earlier were often dismissed as having a headache. But around 20% women have severe migraines where they have to just shut off their life. And of course, there's like endometriosis. So this is the greater burden of these ones on this axis. But if we look at how much they are funded, a lot of these ones move really to the right side of very low funding, especially headache, migraine, and endometriosis, which is a condition which causes really, really severe cramps where you actually vomit and cannot do anything. Uh, yeah. I think one of the examples that's highly discussed is that HIV and AIDS has actually a low burden, but it is one of the most funded ones, and substance abuse. Yeah. Whereas these ones have a lot of burden and a lot of prevalence, but they are not really funded much. So under research, underfunded are definitely on the more on the kind of like supply side of what is happening with women. And the final big gap where especially we also work on is more on the delivery side. So um, so here we look specifically at India, where the number of gynecologists in India are approximately 70,000. Hard to get this number, but that's the best we can get. And if we even just focus on women of ages 15 to 50, we have 350 million. So with some basic back of the envelope calculation, so each gynecologist needs to see around 5,000 women, which basically means they can do one appointment per year of 20 minutes. So this is, so of course the distribution of these gynecologists are much more in the urban side. We are not even talking about the quality of care given, especially for some of these conditions we are speaking about. So definitely highly under resourced field of medicine. I mean, overall low supply in India of doctors, but in gynecology for sure, especially the mismatch being that at different life stages, women do need support. Uh, yeah. So overall, we have seen that the supply is low, and especially in delivery. And
Quick clarificatory question.
yeah.
Are these numbers very different for, say, a country like the US or the UK?
Good point. Actually, I think we do
No.
not know clearly.
Yeah, I mean, back of the head, I mean, we don't know the exact number, but the condition is very similar. The load on, and a lot of doctors that are there, they are focused a lot more on fertility also, which is a big area of concern. So it's pretty similar that way.
Yeah. So I think one of the, at least in Europe and UK, one of the big discussions is like, let's say endometriosis, which is with 10% women, is a normal gynecologist is also not able to handle it. You need further specialization on that. And those, even in a country like UK, you literally have like 100 of those doctors. So, yeah. So overall, this is on the delivery side of it. And we really work on how now there's so many gaps to bridge this overall gender health gap. And we look at how tech and data can be leveraged in specific to close the gaps on delivery. So that is really, we thought that apart from funding and research has to improve, but there is already some research which has happened, not very high quality evidence base often, but there is some. It's not like it's totally zero. So we thought, how can we use tech and data to close this gap? So we can basically overall close the gender health gap by improving health outcomes as soon as possible. So it definitely will be interesting to do a cross-country comparison in this case, where I'm sure if there's a lot of cross-country learnings also we can take on how to improve it. So yeah, now I'll hand it over to Saraswati on how we can use tech and data to leverage the gap.
Hi everyone again. So I'm Saraswati and mostly spend a lot of my time and work experience building digital products. And now one of the things that we have been working at Cranberry is to see how we can leverage tech and data to close some of the gaps of women's health. And today we'll specifically discuss LLMs and how we can use to deliver personalized, scalable support for women's health, right? So when we build digital products, we have to start with the user. That's how you always start with the user. I know we have discussed a lot about data and scale and then a lot of statistics, but here we now think of one specific user. So the one person that we are talking about is a woman. She's 30 years old, understands English, uses WhatsApp, likely never has been to a gynecologist, because a lot of gynecologist visit behavior is linked to fertility or pregnancy, and that's the time we actually visit one. She starts bleeding at the age of 15. So this is 15 years of bleeding, which means she has had 150 periods. Every 30-35 days of her life, she's bleeding for 5 to 7 days, right? So this is the user that we're talking about. And today we'll see some of the ways that we can support to close health delivery for her. Let's call her Swati. We have a name for her. And Swati has period issues that we can address. So the big use case of LLMs is LLMs can actually be the primary health support for women. And when we say primary health support, we are looking at someone who can record symptoms of women when they actually happen, because they keep changing from period to period. And it's hard for an individual to see a pattern of what has happened to you in the last period or the period before that. Also give you real-time guidance when you're actually experiencing a symptom, so that you don't spend so much time in poor health that we just discussed. Give you guidance on when to escalate, and also answer questions related to your health. So we are essentially looking at the LLM playing 3 roles. And our LLM is called Berry. It's a chatbot which works on WhatsApp. 1,000 women use it, and we have seen different questions that they have asked. And these are some of the use cases that we have actually seen happen. So the first role that we are looking at the LLM plays of being a care assistant, which is actually being a record keeper of your information. The second is of being a primary health checker, which is triaging your symptom based on your severity, what are the clinical protocols, escalating it based on what's been the history of your symptom. And third is of being actually a coach. So when you're actually having a symptom, how to help you improve it, what guidance you need, how do we personalize it. So these are the 3 roles we want Berry to play. So let's see an example one by one. Okay, so there's a conversation between Swati and Berry. So Swati says, hey, I got my period. Berry is like, I've made a note of it. Your next period is likely to come on 6th of June. Are you experiencing any cramps today? And Swati says, yes, I have cramps. Like, oh, I have noted ginger tea has evidence of soothing cramps. So that's something that you can try. So now what's happening here is you can see that of course, there's like recording of period data and context. You're recording the period data of the user, and you're contextually asking the next question. And from a database point of view, to be able to do something like this, you need the period history of the user. You need to know what actions they have taken in the past and how to predict for future. This is not very novel in the sense that this has been happening. Most of the period tracker apps do this. They take your previous data, they give you a prediction of the next data. Now, let's look at what LLMs can do and how they can help. Just a quick background is like, of course, LLMs are these large language models which are trained on huge sets of data, and their core functionality is if you ask any question, they are able to chunk your question into smaller chunks and just predict what is the next best answer that can be provided to you, right? So this is what the large language model, something like what OpenAI has or a ChatGPT is able to do. Now, what Berry does on top of that is understanding your intent. So this is where what we do something called fine tuning a model to understand the user's intent, right? So user here has said got my period, and health in general is very contextual. Like just period alone, people will say I've got period, I am chumming, I am down, like I'm not feeling well, I'm having stomach pain. All of these are connotations of having symptoms or having a period pain. And that's where you can take this large language model and add additional training set to you with while giving all this information that look, there are all these terms and this is what they mean, so that the model can then further fine tune its responses. So what LLM, the fine tuning does is that it adjusts the weightages of the different words that it's now getting when it's chunking and finding a better answer. So in this case, like now the user has said got my period. So the model has been able to understand that, okay, the user is talking about getting a period. So you got an instruction. There is a underlying intent when the user says got my period, that the user is likely saying that she got her period today. So you're parsing a date based on that intent, and again storing it using a date parser, because now LLMs are also powered to call different functions. And the other function that it can call is to, okay, now I have the data of today and I have this past data. So let me call a function to run the prediction and give my user the next predicted date. And that's why today is 5th of May. And it said, okay, your next period is actually on 6th of June. Right? So this is one of the ways that LLMs can just be a much better care assistant in terms of getting the information, understanding the context of the user, and keeping the health record correctly as intended. Let's look at another use case. So this is one of the most common questions we get on a chatbot, which is my period is late. And I can see some smiles like around the room. So now Berry is here, and Berry is saying, hey, your last period was 28th of March. Predicted period was on 4th of May, and today it's 5th of May. So Berry is saying, hey, but 1 to 10 days of variation is expected. So you're completely fine. Swati says, okay. But now there's additional information. So Berry is saying, however, the cycle length over the last 3 cycles has been consistently increasing from an average of 30 to 40. If this continues for 3 more periods, we can recommend a checkup. Now, this is a very powerful information to have in the system, right? So again, when you look at a regular app product that's built, it can, of course, give you a pattern of what's been your period length, but it's harder again to spot pattern and give the information. So this is where Berry works as a primary health checker, and it has 4 things. I mean, it's understanding the intent. Also, here the previous intent was just an instruction to store data, whereas here the intent of the user is trying to understand, hey, is it normal or not? You haven't said it, but the question's intent is you want to know, is it normal? Should I be worried about it? So now that intent has been recognized, and you're giving the next contextual action. So what's happening in LLM? First thing is, of course, entity recognition. So here the late period phrase is now recognized as an entity, and now you're looking at what does your model define it to be. So like late period is defined as a symptom. Or sometimes women also say severe cramps, lot of bleeding. A lot of them often refer to emergency. So we also train them also when somebody's saying, I have a lot of bleeding, I have severe pain, or I'm having like cramps now. So those terms are what warrant emergency addressing of symptom, and not just recording like record keeping. Whereas the previous one, the user said, I have cramps, and that was completely okay. So it does the entity recognition, tags it, and then now you use something called a RAG model, which is retrieval augmented generation. So this is where you take the clinical protocols you have, all the information that you have, and you store it in a vector database. And what a LLM can do is to find this information and compare it with what information it has in the database, and see what's the relevant information that I should be taking out. So, for example, a lot of conversation history is also stored in the vector database. So, I said late period on 5th of May. Chatbot can go and find out every time I asked about late period and see if there is a pattern that's actually forming, which then warrants emergency. How does it know if it warrants emergency? You then actually call a function for clinical protocols. So these are clinical protocols that we at Cranberry make with gynecologists, also looking at guidelines by ACOG and RCOG and FOXY. They all have different guidelines laid out for how to look at protocols. When do you actually call for an emergency? And then, so now it has context, it has the protocols, it's able to give you the next action, where here it's saying, this is okay, it has happened 3 times, we wait for 3 more times, and then we see if we need to visit a doctor. So this is a primary health checker where you are actually able to understand the user's data and then take an action. And it's much higher functionality of just LLMs, where if you just go and tell ChatGPT you're having a late period, most likely you'll get some information. It's as good as a Google search, maybe a bit better on that front. And one of the examples that we often quote, and we have heard this another company say it, is like a lot of women health search leads down to either you have cancer or you're pregnant, right? Like all like things is good. So late period is it's a great case of the first thing you'll get is like, are you pregnant? Or like so that's that's what the protocols searches would lead to, right? Like, how has it been? But there's so much more going on when it's just about late period. So that's a second use case of like being a primary health checker. Now the third use case is of being a health coach. So let's look at this conversation. User comes and says, Swati comes and says, I'm having a headache now. So Berry is able to say, hey, your period is due in 2 days. So this is likely to be a period triggered migraine. Are you feeling any nausea? So now this is a question of red flag, right? You want to know if there's an emergency, or should we just deal with it with normal protocols? Swati says, no, it's just a headache. So now Berry is saying, okay, here's what can help with headache. A cold therapy, dip a cloth of water in cold water, place it on your head 10 to 15 minutes. And goes, I know you love chocolates, but chocolates are a trigger for migraines, so please avoid them. And go girl, I'm with you on this. So this is a great use case of LLM, which primarily needs the prompt engineering aspect of LLM. So you are, of course, recording the symptom. Now, this is also a case where even though the user hasn't explicitly recorded a symptom, because they have talked about it, you immediately record that on this day a headache was reported. And you provide guidance. So what you need is a vector database, again, of literature that can help with a period-related migraine. So there is contextual understanding that has happened, because now the Berry was able to tell it, because it knows a pattern of migraine having been reported earlier. So it's able to tell, hey, and I has the period history, and therefore it's able to draw the correlation that this is likely a period triggered migraine. Find the last cycle's pain log and look at what's the advice that's already been given, or what's an advice that already was useful for this user. See a pattern that the user actually loves chocolates because that conversation has happened, or the preference has been stored, and give recommendation based on that. So this is a part of the semantic search, or again, this is another application of the RAG model in a different context. And the third interesting part is that you can actually give it a coaching tone. So again, from a behavior change point of view, we have seen that people need to be told the way they need to be told, and that what works for them. So somebody needs to be told, like, don't listen to anything, just like, push through this. Whereas someone needs to be told, okay, I'm with you, I'm here for you, like, don't worry. And then, of course, you can also say, go girl, I'm with you. We have in our polling, we have seen the sassy coach is the most famous, the one who's able to do a bit of sarcasm and a bit of humor. That's what everybody ends up selecting. But that's where you can prompt the LLM to not only give all of this information, but also give it in a way that makes sense to the user, and therefore increases the chance of implementation. So it's not just content that you're reading and therefore you have to implement. You're actually speaking to someone who's guiding you in a way that makes sense to you and just helps you implement more. So yeah, so I think in the health coaching is more context depth. It's scalable, it's adaptable, because now it's almost like having a personal coach for every user, and it's personalized to their symptom. And a quick point that I do want to touch upon is, and something that you all would have also heard, is that LLMs are prone to hallucinations and they do tend to give information. And that's where a lot of building a RAG model or building function calling, where you're building on LLM's ability to give information or predict, understand, is being used. But when you're giving the information back, you're pulling out a lot from your literature. And right now, of course, the big data that's trained on doesn't have very information contextualized to women's health. And that's what we are building as Cranberry, that layer of women health information, so that it just becomes much more useful and relevant for women. So how did we help Swati? We gave her relevant information. We gave it to her at the right time when she was actually having the symptom. We also helped her manage escalation of her symptom. So yeah, let's call her Swati. And Swati is happy that now she has support. And the whole idea is that how do we, this delivery is what can help reducing the amount of time women spend in poor health. Because imagine, in the absence of all of this guidance, you're almost second guessing why it's happening, what's happening with you, are you the only one having it? Or maybe somebody has told you, yeah, you just had to lose weight, otherwise this is all the problems. So you're thinking, yeah, I didn't go to work out this month, that's why I'm having this. But it is totally not. I mean, there is enough literature and science and mechanisms to help you through it. So this is a way to make that like accessible. So yeah, I think this is the way we are looking to close. I think there's a lot of things to be done in women's health, but women do spend 25% more time in poorer health. But like, this is the way we support women in poor health, and hope that like they spend more time being active and living their life, and the 10% reduces to at least 8% or something. Yeah, I think that's the end of this